Okay. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Very happy to be here. I'm Daphne with Relax with Daphne, and today we're talking about grief. LuAnn Collins is a certified life coach who helps women who have experienced loss, are going through change, and are ready to create endless possibilities for themselves. She's a mom and a grandmother and a COVID/gray divorcee who also happens to have decades of experience in education, a master's degree in science instructional technology, and PhD in adult education. With additional certification in women's studies, mindfulness, grief counseling, and flower essences, quite a mix, LuAnn is uniquely positioned to answer 3 questions on grief for us today. Now, I invite any viewers we might have to add your own questions for LuAnn in the chat, and she'll have an opportunity to respond after the 3 questions in a live Q&A. And if you're watching the recording, you may drop questions on grief in the comments, and I'll keep an eye on them and let LuAnn know that they're there. Or you can contact her directly by email at luann@luannccollins.com, which I put down in the show description below, along with her website. And LuAnn, I am so thankful that you're here today, my friend. In addition to your impressive credentials, I know you as a thoughtful, warm, and funny person, a gardener, a runner, and a dog mom. Anyone looking for a life coach who's seen some things, who has deep compassion, would be really fortunate to work with you. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. LuAnn, let's get to our first question.
Okay.
Most of our audience has significant experience with loss. What I'm wondering about is that liminal period where you move beyond grief. How do we know when we're done grieving or if we're still grieving?
All right. Well, first, I want to position myself just a little bit. So I am a life coach. I am not a counselor. That means that I am not an expert on grief, like a researcher or someone who has studied that. But what I am is an expert on my grief and the grief that I've gone through. So I speak from my own personal experience because I think that's important for everyone going forward, because you will be the expert on your grief. There are things that we share in common. And what I'd like to do is give you an example of an experience that happened to me, and then we'll come back through and apply it towards grief. So it's going to sound like this is totally irrelevant, but by the end of it, you'll go, oh, okay, I get it now. So about 3 years ago, I was playing with a table saw, and I rammed my finger into the blade. And I got myself to the hospital, got it all sewn up, stitches, got a splint on my finger, went through all of that, and was incredibly surprised by how many things I couldn't do just because it was my finger. Then got the stitches out, got the splint off, did all of that, and there was this longer period of healing where I had to figure out how to do things like dishes, how to work in the garden, how to play the piano, how to type, how to walk the dogs, because oddly enough, the finger kept me from being able to do even some of the things that I was used to doing on a day-to-day basis. But I figured out what to do. I figured out how to do it. I made modifications. I adapted my life. And then we're 3 years out. And you would think, well, it's all done. It's all over. Life is great. Except when I type, it's okay. I can just feel it a little bit. When I play the piano, because of the way my hand is positioned, I can feel it better. So it still feels a little bit wonky. But when I go to pick up like a screw, or if a bean falls on the floor, if I go to pick up a bean or any small thing, or if I try to reach down into something and pull it out, then the very tip of my finger is numb. And so it gives me a lot of trouble. But even then, I have adapted and figured out a way how to do what I need to do in my life. So now go back through and insert your loss. So there's like an overarching process that you go through. There's this acute phase where you go, uh-oh, what just happened here? And you figure out what to do next. And then there's this long healing phase, the active phase of grieving, where you figure out what works and what doesn't work, and you accommodate your life and you accommodate the grief to your life. And then there's an after phase. So it's not like you're ever over grief. You just figure out how to live with it and within it.
That's beautiful. Living within it. Yeah. And I know that you are a modest person, but part of the reason why we're talking about grief is that you have facilitated a number of grief groups. So I don't want people to take away, from this discussion that you don't have any experience with helping people through grief. You certainly do.
Okay.
And you probably have some insight into, we just talked about the emotional process, the mental process, but what happens to the body? What does the body do with grief?
All right, we're going back to the finger.
Yeah.
So, finger hits the blade. It was like an electric shock had gone into the tip of my finger, up my arm, into my shoulder, across my chest, down the other arm, up into my head, down into my toes. Heartbeat, head hurt. But our bodies are these miraculous instruments. And so it came through, and all of those chemicals that do the anesthesia that causes you not to feel it so much, that took over and went through the hospital, but the pain was extraordinary. So that's when I realized, all right, even after the stitches and they numbed it and did all of that kind of stuff, there was inflammation, there was swelling, there was the next day full body aches from the tension of holding in. The nervous system was just completely overwhelmed because of all of the chemicals that my body dumped on it, the adrenaline and cortisol and all of the stuff that happens. And you can't separate out the emotional and the cognitive from the physical, because the story you tell about what happens then causes your body to react in certain ways. So your body goes through that normal, natural healing process. But the thoughts that you have and the story that you tell about it then either contributes to or helps your healing process. So you go through that shock phase. And if you then go through like what I did, denial, it's like, I can't believe I just did this. And every time I tried to think about it, it brought it back. And I revisited that initial shocky. And so I had to back off of it, because your body can't handle that much stuff, or your mind can't handle it either. The anger, oh, I can't believe I did that to myself. Oh, that stupid machine. How could that machine have hurt me that way? Oh, God must have done, the whole anger bit over this little thing. Then you go in, well, what if I hadn't of this, or what if I hadn't of that, or what if the day hadn't been, or what if all of the many things, that the bargaining portion of it. But all of that contributes to how your body is able to respond. So all of that is still part and parcel of the grieving process. So you have the initial loss, because that's what we're talking about. And then your body then does what it needs to do in order to heal, which is physical. It's very physical, but it also is helped by how you think about and the story that you tell yourself about what just happened.
Hmm. Yeah, part of the reason why I asked this question is that I had a long phase of caregiving, and when my mom passed, my body was not the same. And some of it was the strain, the physical strain of caregiving, but a lot of it was just the grief, right? Like my body was different after that. And it took me a long time to figure out how to heal, and even acknowledging that I did need to heal. That was the big surprise. It's like I just didn't notice that I needed to attend to that part of my grieving. So thank you. That's really helpful. And I like the analogy between the physical injury and the grief, because an injury is an injury and we're still going to have to grieve it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So my third question is when do we know we're ready to take our next steps beyond grief, and what might we consider doing first? And I understand it's going to be different for everybody, but in general, there's probably some universal themes that you might be aware of.
Um, Go back to the process. So you've got this acute phase, and that's usually where you go through all the rituals. So for me and the finger, it was going through the hospital and the insurance, and then the stitches and the getting the stitches out, and that's the acute phase where you're just dealing with the day-to-day stuff. So you might have the ritual of a funeral, but you still have all the insurance and you've got the estate. Or if you have some other loss that you're going through, because it's any loss, whether it's a job or a pet or moving, you still have these day-to-day things that you have to do, which wraps up and takes care of that initial phase. So that definitely is not the time, although you're going to be ready for it. You're going to say, I don't want to do this anymore. Then but you still have to go through and sort of take care and set things in order. But it's the next phase that people really don't want to spend time in. Like you said, you had to stop and actually consciously make the decision that your body is different. And that is the longer healing process, because you are different. It isn't one of those things that it's like cutting off and saying, this is no longer going to be. And that's where you can facilitate yourself going through it. You can direct it. Or what most people do is they just go, okay, well, that's done now. And they try to go back to living the way they were before, and not acknowledging or honoring that things are different. There's a hurt, and you either attend to it or it tends to you, and it will take you. And then all of those grieves, all of those losses sort of layer. So it's at the end of that, or at a point in that, where you hear yourself saying, okay, I get this, and I'm ready to do these other things. And so you try, you start testing, can I do this? If you're not ready, then more than likely you're going to go back. You're going to feel like you're more in the acute phase. And so it isn't like, okay, here I go, I'm taking these steps and I'm going to finish this. But it's one step forward, two step back, and then three steps forward, and then a little bit more, and then and back. And so you're cycling back and forth until really what you're doing is getting back into balance, into homeostasis pretty much. And you'll then be able to take whatever it is that has happened to you, that loss, and let it travel with you, so it isn't quite so much. And what you see people doing is cutting that short. They don't, it's not fun, it's not painful, it's unique to each person, and it's unique to each person within the loss that they have experienced. So one loss that they have, they may have said, yeah, but I didn't, when my mom died, I reacted one way than when my dad died. Parents, but I still grieved them in very different ways. I was at a different point in my life. I was a different age. I had a different relationship. So that's the other thing that people don't always recognize, and it may not be a parent. You may have a dog that you grieve more than you do someone else that has died that you felt like. So you can't judge. You just have to um, keep your presence and testing. Just keep testing. Am I ready now? And at some point, you'll hear yourself say, "I'm ready," and then you go out and you try.
I like that. I like the idea of letting it travel with you, because you're right. You aren't the same. You aren't the same person as you were before the loss, and that's okay.
And that's
And
okay.
so often we put parameters around, it's like, okay, I'm going to allow myself 3 days off work to go to the funeral and grieve, and then I'm going to go back to work and everything's going to be fine. Well, that's not at all what can happen if it was someone close to you. And but at the same time, um, comparing your experience to other people's experience, I don't see how that's useful.
It's not. It isn't.
Yeah.
No, and it sets us up. People want frequently, they want to know, how many days is this going to happen? But that's like a multiple choice test. And that's not how grief works. So I guess the other way to think about it is that grief is like an umbrella. It's an umbrella of emotions. But the definition that I use is that grief is the term that we use to describe the process of experiencing loss. So it isn't, here, I'm going to do this now. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this other thing. It's like, okay, this is life, and now I'm in it, and this is part of living, and we just find our way through it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, our tradition at 3 Questions On is that we ask our guests for one last gem for the audience. LuAnn, what do you think? What else do you want to add to this discussion about grief?
To honor your grief, to not compare whatever loss or losses, because most of it from childhood we experience loss, to not compare those losses and not to compare your loss with someone else's loss. Yeah. That all of it is unique, and to allow yourself the grace to just be human, to go through it. And I guess the very, very end result is just to love yourself through these things that are just, they're going to be with you. They're going to change you for the better or for the worse, and just allow that to happen.
So loving yourself through your grief. I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, one of the ways that I'm dealing with grief is by doing sound baths with my Crystal Alchemy sound bowls. And I am holding one. It's called Solace for the Heartbroken and Grieving, a week from Sunday on April 28th at 4 p.m. And there's a link down below for tickets at Eventbrite if anybody watching this would like to attend. But I'm trying, in that sound bath, I'm going to be addressing the physical effects of grief. And yeah, I'd love to hear what people think. And yeah, I would just want to say thank you, LuAnn, for joining us here today and talking about grief. And as you have offered this wisdom, I hope people see the value in working with a life coach who has so much experience and so much understanding of the process around moving through loss, moving through change, and taking steps toward what's next.
So. Thank you. Can I give you a testimony? Because you did one of those sound baths for me and a couple of other friends of ours, and it is amazing, just amazing. I could not believe how, even over the internet, how incredibly healing it was. So yes, I would recommend that everyone go. You just have a gift for pulling it all together. So I'm
Thank
glad
you
you,
so much.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm hoping you'll come. You'll be there, and I'd love to hear what you think afterwards. Yeah. Well, thank you, LuAnn, for being my very, very first guest in this series through questions on whatever. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your wisdom.
Oh,
Thanks,
thank you,
everyone.
Daphne.
Bye.
Bye.